Duchenne muscular dystrophy affects 1 in 3,500 primarily male births. It's the most common lethal genetic disorder of childhood today. Boys are typically diagnosed when they're 5, typically in a power chair by the time they're 12, and they typically succumb to the disorder by the time they're 19.
I became involved with Duchenne muscular dystrophy when my son Jet was diagnosed at the age of 5.
We started Jet Foundation in 2001. Since that time and along this road, we've met lots of different families, and through those families we've realized that there are a lot of unmet needs. There weren't that many options for treatments. About a year ago, I was at Patriots Day training camp with families affected by Duchenne, and a little boy ran past me down this little pathway, and behind him was his brother in a power chair. And I quickly recognized that child as a child that I had helped taking care of a year prior to at camp. I knew that child was in a stroller half the time, and now he was actually running. That was a child who was diagnosed with Duchenne, and I know that that does not happen in Duchenne. When boys stop walking, their upper extremities go. Their pulmonary function tests go down. When boys start to decline after the age of 7, they don't stabilize. They don't come back. Here was a child who not only stabilized, but started to improve. Shortly thereafter, I reached out to Mom, and I found out that he was one of 12 children that were in a human clinical trial for exon skipping for a compound called eteplirsen. That changed everything that day for me and gave me focus, finally, for something, some hope that I might be able to save Jet's life and that this technology could reach out and save many lives. And it became very clear to me right from the get-go that it was going to be, there had to be some sort of regulatory pathway that the FDA needed to follow, that the company needed to follow in order to expedite the manufacturing and the marketing of this technology. I soon found out that it was something called FDASIA that would get me involved with the FDA. And FDASIA allowed me and other parents who were in the clinical trial to get in front of the FDA and begin to have dialogue with them and express to the FDA how important this drug was to the boys who needed it, and to express to the FDA the risk-benefit, that these parents were taking the risk, that other parents are willing to take a risk to get this drug out to kids as quickly as possible. FDASIA gives everybody affected by rare disease the ability to go to the decision makers at the FDA. Why is this important? Because everybody is affected by rare disease, and everybody should have a voice to change the outcome for their loved one or for themselves. What I've learned through this entire process is it's really moms like myself who use their voices and find their strengths and use their passion for their children that can really make the change.
Following the success of landmark clinical trials, these parents see a pivotal moment. An FDA decision could make their children the last generation to die from Duchenne, or the first generation to live. Parents and leading scientists urge Congress to remind the FDA of the responsibility to quickly approve promising treatments for this fatal disease.
The world's leading scientists here to help educate all of us so that it can be clear that accelerated approval is necessary to save this generation of boys.
This is the forefront of a new kind of medicine, personalized medicine, and we need to pave the way. If we don't pave the way, it will be decades before those other drugs are in the clinic and in the kids. And that's going to be life or death for my son, Charlie. The feeling of knowing that this is here and it's not accessible to us is, there's no word to describe.
I'm Christine McSherry. I come from Pembroke, Massachusetts. My son has a disease called Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Duchenne muscular dystrophy is the #1 childhood disorder, fatal childhood disorder in our country today, but very few people are aware of it. It affects about 1 in 3,500 male births, and boys typically die by the time they're 19, sometimes 20, sometimes 22. The takeaway from there is that they always die. Here today, we want to discuss the fact that the FDA has tools that were passed by Congress with the direct intent
of getting medications like eteplirsen to children like ours as quickly as possible. Please understand that these men, along with the other researchers and clinicians that were in the room with us yesterday, have decades more experience in Duchenne research and treatment than anyone that sits inside the building at the FDA. Dr. Wilton, on the far right, is the man that first successfully accomplished exon skipping in the mouse model of Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Dr. Kunkel in the middle, from Harvard University, is the man who led the team that originally discovered the dystrophin gene that has the genetic defect that causes Duchenne. And Dr. Mendel is the primary investigator for eteplirsen, and he's also the researcher and clinician who has been the primary investigator for more clinical trials on Duchenne than any other doctor in the world. So if they're not going to listen to us, they need to listen to them, and we're concerned that that's not happening.
So what I've been asked to do is give you a rundown on molecular genetics and how this therapy works. And I'd also like to note that there has been extensive funding from the NIH and the NBA.
So I've been working for more than 30 years on this disorder, and I look at this decade as the decade of therapy.
And I really have two messages that I'd like to convey during this very brief time that I have, and as being the principal investigator for the eteplirsen trial. The major message is, which is truly incredible, is that this drug works.
So I want to lay out the two timelines so you can understand what happens if, on the one hand, the FDA acts as authorized and uses the accelerated approval approach, and the consequences if the agency fails to do so. 4 years is too late to keep Aiden out of a permanent wheelchair. 4 years is too late for every boy when the data we have already show that the drug is safe and effective. And it will be a decade or more before my own son sees a treatment. In that case, my son will likely die.
We are not so much in a race against the science as we are in a race against the clock. We absolutely will find a treatment for Duchenne, but will we find it in time for the families that are sitting in this room? In my home, I'm faced with this stark reality on a daily basis. I was lucky enough to have one son, Max, who's on eteplirsen, but his older brother, Austin, is not. He's already non-ambulatory. In the last 2.5 years, while Max has gained back his independence, currently, this minute, Austin is losing the ability to feed himself. We have a unique opportunity. This generation, our children, could be the last generation of Duchenne patients to die. Or it could be the first generation to survive this disease. We are that close. But it will only happen if the FDA does the right thing. They need to listen to the researchers, examine the science, and operate under the provisions of FDASIA. We are asking Congress to exercise its oversight of the FDA and to make sure that the FDA is using the tools like the Accelerated Approval Program.
We are asking them to follow the law that Congress passed, and we are asking them to do it now. One of the slides that Dr. Mendel showed you was from 48 weeks into this clinical trial. That was in October 2012. We are now at 120 weeks. That's 2 years and 3 months of treatment with no side effects, dystrophin being produced, and clinical benefit.
For those who care, this is a crucial time to help by speaking up. To add your voice and help win the Race to Yes, visit www.theracetoyes.org.